Welcome to Cultivated Live for Wednesday, September 11th. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media, the host of this program called Cultivated Live. On Wednesdays, I'm here with my co-founder and our editor-in-chief, Jeremy Berke. And since we launched Cultivated, we have been aimed to be cannabis industry first, providing you with the most insightful, important, timely, and useful information every single day through our newsletter at cultivated.news, through this program, which streams on LinkedIn and YouTube, and our newsletter. Did I already say that? Anyway, you can find that at cultivated.news. It's important. Find it. You'll love it. It's a great read, especially when Jeremy writes it. Jeremy, you've been writing a lot about the intersection of cannabis and politics. We thought it would all come to some sort of culmination last night, and certainly there was a debate, which is important, which we'll talk about. But I would say the last 10 days of the presidential race, the candidates have gotten closer to closer on the cannabis issue, or have they, I guess? Give us a little bit of rundown of sort of what you've been seeing out there. I guess first it started in Florida with what the president said, and then ended with rescheduling. And then give us your thoughts over the past week on the Republican side of the presidential race.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks, Jay. And I was sad to see no cannabis mentioned, but I think that may be a little bit of our myopia paying attention to this every single day and hoping it comes up as a big issue, and evidently not. It has been interesting to see Trump, to be charitable to him, his evolution on the topic, right? I mean, this is a guy whose administration was quite regressive towards the cannabis industry. His first attorney general, Jeff Sessions, rescinded some very important federal protections. And so I personally did not expect to see him come out with these statements. Last week, he said he would support Amendment 3, the ballot measure to legalize cannabis in his adopted home state of Florida. And then on late Sunday night, he came out with sort of a pretty coherent policy statement that was basically a laundry list of what, the big MSOs that the industry wants to see out of federal legislation. That includes supporting states' rights to choose on cannabis. That includes, support for the Safe Banking Act, which is a bill that's failed multiple times that would protect banks that want to work with the cannabis industry, and support for Amendment 3, which means, I think it's the first time, I believe, that a president has been able to vote on legalization in their home state, or someone running for president, I should say. And so, it was a pretty interesting evolution to see it happen. And it also really brings Trump very much in line with the mainstream Democratic position, which I think is quite interesting. I mean, there's just less daylight between Trump and Harris on cannabis than there is with many issues between members of their own party. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And it's just a sign to how popular cannabis is. But, it didn't make it on the debate stage, unfortunately. And so while it's popular, it might not be a priority for either candidate.
Yeah. It's popular, and the presidential candidates seem to be close on this issue, but this issue is not close in Florida. And in some respects, tearing apart the Republican Party in Florida may be too strong a word, but we have the Republican governor of Florida pushing a no vote on Amendment 3, which will legalize adult use cannabis in Florida. We have the former president, the Republican presidential candidate, saying he's going to vote in favor of Amendment 3 in Florida, his adoptive home state. We had the young Republicans saying they're going to be in line with Trump on this. A lot is happening in a microcosm of Florida as it relates to this issue. And maybe it is a sort of microcosm of the Republican Party overall, where you have some real social conservatives against legalization of cannabis. You have some others that are for it. But zoom in on Florida a little bit, because that has also been sort of the secondary outcome of the president talking about that, former president talking about this.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll caveat my comments with I'm not an expert on Florida politics. It's its own sort of unique beast, but it's an interesting state for many reasons. And I think especially the Amendment 3 fight, it's becoming this proxy battle, between DeSantis and Trump. And, I think it's not hyperbole to say it's sort of the soul of the Republican Party. Is it this social conservative DeSantis, Speaker Mike Johnson wing, or is it MAGA, right? And a lot of MAGA people, to their credit, they support legalization. They support the use of cannabis. They, don't really care very much about abortion and these things that were calling cards for the Republican Party for so long. They have differing opinions on. And so it's sort of interesting to see Amendment 3 be this proxy fight between the DeSantis and Trump wing of the Republican Party. From a political science angle, I don't know how much Trump's endorsement will really lift, Amendment 3 in the polls. But like when you look on Polymarket, which is a betting predictor for polling, like it did seem to have an effect. It's raised it up a little bit. And I think, the current odds for it to pass are around 81%. But, it still has to clear a supermajority. That's 60%, not 50%. And so, it remains to be seen whether that will hold, though I do believe Trump's support will mean a lot. And on the young Republicans front, I'll just sort of say one thing there. It's like, you've brought Trump, the young Republicans, and the Florida Senate Democrats all on the same side of an issue. I mean, that is just a bizarre, like, what other issue would you have a tent so large as to fit those three things in it? So, it's quite fascinating to watch. But, signs are pointing to it passing, perhaps regardless of Trump's support and regardless of DeSantis's obstinance. But Trump's support certainly helps.
Yeah. I want to start in Florida with this question or conversation and then go to two other big states. We've seen the sort of hemp versus cannabis battle playing out in Florida as it relates to Amendment 3, where the hemp industry is on one side advocating for a no vote and funding a no vote, and the cannabis industry, certainly another, pushing for a yes vote. In Missouri and California, we have governors and emergency orders in California, in that case, like really cracking down or regulating the hemp industry or hemp-derived THC products. Like this, while it's certainly not as on the fore in the sort of general sense of like cannabis legalization, it is in the background of this industry, as we've talked about it a lot. Like there was movement on that this week as well with Governor Newsom in California with an emergency order saying we're going to basically crack down and regulate hemp-derived THC products. This seems to be a big movement, even further this week. Like, is there any way to predict what's going to happen on this front?
Yeah, no, I think it's a huge movement. And I think, many state government, state attorneys general are really putting hemp in their crosshairs. I mean, sorry to use like a terrible metaphor, but they're really putting it in their crosshairs. And I think that there will be legal challenges, right? Given the DEA's insistence that, hemp-derived intoxicating cannabinoids, so hemp-derived THC, is an illegal drug, but that was thrown out in court last week by a federal court. And so, like, given the DA's insistence that they should have deference on this question, and then given the federal court's ability now to say they don't have deference, it's going to be really interesting to see whether there are legal challenges that end up in federal court around these hemp bans. But look, I mean, I think two things can be true. Like, one is that on a personal level, like some of these products are bad and they're making people sick and they should be taken off shelves. They're underregulated. And, there are companies doing this the right way. So are blanket bans really the best way to approach the problem? I mean, I think you can look at the history of cannabis prohibition more broadly and say that like maybe there is a more nuanced way to approach the problem and, bring some of the hemp companies under the fold of cannabis regulations rather than ban them outright, because people will certainly still seek out these products, especially in states where consumers have no alternative, no legal cannabis to go from. I mean, they're still going to seek this out. And when you sort of push things to the margin, they often get less safe and even less rigorously regulated and tested than they are right now, which is, not saying much, but it can be worse. And I think it will get worse.
Especially when people are ordering it to their door, right?
Exactly.
Like there's e-com, and we've actually covered it in some. Like there's actually e-com platforms that are mailing around the country, so it's going to be very difficult to crack down on. But I think it is an interesting. We have this battle going on in Florida around the ballot measure. We have these issues in Missouri and California, big states. We have in Minnesota a whole different thing where they're not actually cracking down, but actually sort of folding it into a different sort of regulatory framework. So there's lots happening, and even have some of the big major MSOs investing in hemp-derived products. There's just this in addition to the conversation around rescheduling and safe banking and a major ballot measure in Florida. This is the one that I think may have major impacts on the industry itself and how it operates and sort of where the industry goes.
I mean, I think it's a really, you brought up a really good point. I mean, Curaleaf is investing in THCA or hemp-derived flower. I mean, that's a tacit acknowledgement that like, okay, here's basically the same product. There's an extra couple steps to formulate it. but we can sell it in all 50 states, and we're not subject to these onerous regulations and licensing and 280 taxes. And, I'm sure that regulators want to bring that into the fold, but for now, it's a loophole that basically allows a very similar product to be marketed and sold legally. I'll put that in scare quotes, in all 50 states. At the end of the day, like, if I were to offer my personal opinion, right, I think most consumers want weed and they don't really care whether it's hemp derived intoxicating cannabinoids or it's just regular old weed. And so I think, if regulations make a little bit more sense, consumers are going to start to choose the real thing. And I know they're both real, but the natural thing versus, the hemp derived thing. But it is regulations that are sort of creating this market, and it's going to be hard to put the genie back in the bottle.
It is. We've had on the CEO of Cantrip, of course, and sort of talked about some of these issues in depth, and even how some of those hemp derived THC beverage companies are operating now, but also planning for a future in which there is a regulatory framework, as if you described.
Right. I mean, you'd have to be a very stupid business owner to basically predicate your entire business on a loophole and not plan for the alternative situation. And I think a lot of these companies are very much aware of that, very much planning for it. There is the argument that's been made, Adam McCamtrip made it very well, that this is sort of the tip of the spear for normalizing, intoxicating cannabis beverages in, stores like Total Wine, right? Because they can put them in, consumers will get used to it. Like I think that's a positive step that hemp can take right now. But eventually, in 5 years, these regulations are going to get normalized. I believe that strongly.
I do too. And I think we're also, I don't think we've even talked since the hearing, the ALJ, which will happen on December 2nd, from the DEA, which is an administrative law judge hearing around rescheduling, again, which is December 2nd, which interestingly is the day before MJ Biz starts in Las Vegas. So it'll be a very busy cannabis week, and there'll be a lot of chatter about the impact, benefits, however the ALJ is going. But any thoughts on that? Because it does, of course, push the decision beyond the election. But now we sort of have both parties, at least the leading members of both parties, sort of talking about this, not as if it's a fait accompli, but they both do support rescheduling.
Yeah, no, it's honestly, I believe, a bit of a bizarre scenario. And I don't mean bizarre bad. I just mean bizarre as in strange, that we're going to have this hearing. There are going to be pretty stringent challenges on the way that, the DEA decides what is a Schedule 1 versus Schedule 3 drug, the way the HHS did in its report. To get into sort of the details, there's all these different 2-prong, 5-prong tests, and there's going to be a lot of lawyers and scientists who quibble with aspects of the test that both agencies are using. All that being said, it does mean that the final Schedule 3 rule may be kicked to whoever is the next president. And your point is absolutely correct that both presidents support reclassifying cannabis to Schedule 3. So look, it is going to happen unless there is such a strong argument from, whatever lawyer that smart approaches to marijuana, anti-legalization group, maybe Bill Barr himself, based on his, recent public comments about cannabis. Unless he makes such a strong argument that throws cold water on the whole thing, it is going to happen. And this is just sort of another delay that every company in the industry is going to have to deal with. But I think it's, if not fait accompli, 98% of the way there, and we're just going to have an interesting hearing, to say the least, where there will be some good arguments made on both sides.
Would have been cooler if you said that in Latin.
That's all my Latin. That's all I got for you.
Yeah, fait accompli is the only. Well, I know some others, but it's all idioms like that as well. Jeremy, I always appreciate talking to you on Wednesday mornings on this program, Cultivated Live. We have another show tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern, with Krista Raymer from Vitrina. We're going to be talking about, of course, cannabis retail, as we do all the time on Thursdays. And then Friday again, our new program called Reporters Notebook with our friends at MJ Biz. We'll be talking about that and teasing that tomorrow. Jeremy, as always, thanks so much for making time this morning.
Thank you, Jay. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Everybody, we will see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. We actually had a Pacific time guest this week. They were extremely tired by the time it was over. But Jeremy, thanks again. We'll see everybody tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern right here on LinkedIn, YouTube. Get our newsletter in your inbox every day at cultivated.news. Everybody, have a great day.